Historically, when the wild almond hedge was first planted in Cape Town, it was utilized to divide up the land, disallowing people access to certain areas, disowning and disposing of the native population from land they had inhabited for thousands of years, as well as taking away the Khoisan's ancient grazing land. Cape Town's volatile colonial past is still visible economically and socially. Remnants of the past still remain, such as colonial trees as well as old ruins. In this short video archive, site-specific footage as well as audio recordings are used to show what remains of Cape Town's colonial past. The site in question, the Wild Almond Hedge in the Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens and the Grooteskie Zoo. Both of these spaces were built by colonial powers, specifically the Dutch and the British. This short visual story will briefly explore the remnants of the two sites, where they lie geographically, and how they fit into Cape Town in the present day. The first story is site-specific to the beautifully vast Kirstenbosch Gardens, nestled at the eastern foot of the Table Mountain in Cape Town. What simply looks like a bunch of bushes is covering the surviving remnants of the wild almond hedge, planted by the Dutch colonial settler Jan van Riebeeck in 1659, 7 years after he had first arrived in the Cape representing the Dutch East India Company. His task? To set up a refreshment station for ships passing by Cape Town on their journeys. Because of the growing conflict between the Dutch settlers and the local Khoisan people, Jan van Riebeeck had decided to define a boundary to the settlement by ploughing up a 3.6-meter hedge in between the traditional Khoisan grazing route. According to the South African National Biodiversity Institute, two clans lived on the Cape Peninsula. The defensive barrier would also prevent Khoisan people from raiding the livestock. The barrier started at the mouth of the Salt River and snaked through the Rondebosch to the Kirstenbosch, using the Lisbeek River to aid the hedge as a part of the barrier. The building of the barrier was expensive and took a long time, so in order to speed up this process, the last stretch of the section between the river and the Kirstenbosch was planted with thorny shrubs and wild almond trees. The wild almond hedges are characterized by enormous intertwined dark-colored branches. As you can see, they grow horizontally as well as vertically. The wild almond is not a member of the almond family, as the name suggests, but is actually a member of the Protea family. Kubwenki is the Khoisan name for the wild almond tree. Despite them being poisonous if eaten raw, the Khoisan would soak the fruit in water for several days, then boil and roast. The original inhabitants of the Cape would dig up the roots of the tree for food during the winter. Despite how idyllic the area is, the historical value of the site is significant and has been repurposed and subject to drastic transformation in terms of its use over time. The Grooteskie Zoo is also located on the eastern slopes of Table Mountain and now sits next to the University of Cape Town. Cecil John Rhodes built the Grooteskie Zoo in 1897 as a part of his imperial agenda. Rhodes had a fondness for lions, as they were seen as king of beasts and symbolized the dreams of the British Empire. Rhodes had hoped to grow his zoo until it contained animals from across the British Empire. Rhodes had been gifted a group of lions as well as a leopard. Thus, a new lion enclosure was built in the 1930s. The pathway leading up to the lion enclosure with trees planted on both sides, as if building up to something grand, going higher and higher up the steps to finally reveal the grand view of the Table Mountain slopes with the lion enclosure nestled beneath it. The lion pit has a high vertical concrete wall. 2 meters into the pit there is a high metal fence that would separate the lions from the wall at the top, where spectators would stand. The zoo also had other animals such as monkeys, zebras, llamas, emus, and peacocks. 5 alien bird species were also released in Cape Town in the 1900s by Rhodes. 3 of the 5 went extinct. The stone pines seen on the slopes behind the lion enclosure were planted by the Dutch East India Companies. They were planted as they adapted well to the Cape's climate, and were also made for an aesthetically pleasing landscape according to the European standards. When Rhodes arrived, he removed most of the indigenous vegetation on the land for his animals. Now there's a mixture of indigenous trees which have grown back, as well as the exotic trees which are estimated to be over 60 years old. During apartheid, the zoo's costs became too high for the new government, who needed money for other uses. The zoo has thus been vacant since 1975. In 1999, part of the Grote Schuur estate that includes the zoo was incorporated into the Cape Peninsula National Park to manage and make it accessible to all South Africans. Areas that were once used as colonial symbols of power are now used as tourist attractions or just are vacant. Planting was used by colonial settlers as a way to either keep the local people off their newly claimed land or to further the imperial agenda, spreading their flora into the faraway colonies. This video project has aimed to understand the volatile past of these specific sites through the medium of video, as they both represent the intersection of cultural, historical, and environmental pasts.